their health. So issues to remember when we're celebrating today what is a great victory for justice. Now, this scapegoating exercise happened as a result of collusion between the banks and government agencies, including the SFO and FCA. And we're not done with that. I'll come back to that in Parliament in the autumn. And this scandal also highlights the need for urgent reform within our justice system on a range of issues, ranging from the handling and treatment of expert witnesses right through to the rigidity of the appeal system, which has taken us so long to get where we are today. So that's all from me. I'm now going to turn to Tom and Carlo and to their legal advisors. And at the end of that, we'll take questions. So, Tom, a great day for you.
Yeah, a day that I've dreamt about and hoped for whilst I was lying in prison cells on awful prison beds. And then having left prison, I've continued to hope and dream for. And so many times I composed what I was going to say. I thought about what I wanted to say when a moment like this would eventually rise. And and I've forgotten most of it now, as I said. But I mean, I always believed that it would happen. I always had confidence it would happen. And, there were times I almost quit. And thanks largely to support of many people, including Karen Toddner, my solicitor for the last 9 years, she's allowed me to keep the faith and allowed me to keep fighting. And, this wasn't a gamble for me. My trial judge called me a gambler, gambling on a perverse verdict from the jury. So I decided today I would wear a T-shirt, Kenny Rogers gambler T-shirt. You've got to know when to hold them. Basically, I didn't believe it was a gamble because I always knew that it wasn't a criminal offence. We hadn't actually lied ever about the number that was submitted. That wasn't the ruling that they made today, but in all reality, the acknowledgement was there was a range of numbers, and we never asked for those numbers to deviate from outside that range. And I'm really very grateful to the Supreme Court. We've had a mixed. Well, not mixed. In fact, we've had a consistent set of decisions from every other tribunal, and they were all to lose. And I got asked at my last appeal how I felt after we lost, and I said, "Well, ask me when we've won, because I know how it feels to lose." And today, I'm learning how it feels to have won. It's an incredible feeling, and I feel very blessed. And I just really, really want to say thank you to so many people, because there are a lot of people who I will never meet, who I will never know, who've supported me in many different ways. My first CCRC appeal was crowdfunded. So for each and every one of you, there were people in the Philippines putting in $5. I'm never going to meet that person. But if that's you, let me know and I'll buy you a beer. Yeah, so I just wanted to, and also my legal team, like I said, Karen's really kept me going. My barristers, Adrian Derbyshire and Tom Doble, were just phenomenal at the Supreme Court. And I became rather addicted to watching the replays on the website. I think I probably watched them 10 times. I could almost probably give the same closing or rather rebuttal speech and opening speech that Adrian gave to the justices, because I've watched him give it so many times. And I'm free. And everyone said to me, "What are you going to do next?" And I honestly have no idea. It feels very surreal at the moment. I'm still trying to adjust and work out what I do now. Those are my words. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
What I do now. Those are my words. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Carlo, justice for you too.
Yeah, at last. Echoing what Tom said, first of all, just thank you very much for all of you who supported our struggle for justice over the last 10 years of our life. I don't even know how I feel right now. It's a mixture of relief, happiness. It's been a crazy experience. think maybe one thing that I find the most significant is how, for all this time we were caught up in this Kafkaesque nightmare where nothing made any sense, where we were accused of things that didn't make any sense, on evidence there was not actually evidence for the whatever thing we were supposedly being charged of, and being called dishonest, greedy bankers, blah blah blah, and with judges telling the juries, "Oh, don't worry about the charges, don't worry about the evidence. This is obviously dishonest, bankers, greed, blah blah blah, gambler, manipulators. You don't need to understand. Think of people who lost their job, blah blah." And then you try to argue against the word and say, but can we actually look at what we're actually being charged with? And nobody engages with you, nobody responds, nobody look at your case. We've gone through a series of appeals and rulings that made absolutely no sense by people that are supposedly in charge of justice and the rule of law. And they completely disregarded the rule of law on the basis of trying to get people convicted on abstract moral charges. And all of a sudden you think like you exist in a different world, where you try to speak to the world, and you can't, because they speak in a different language, a language of emotions that are unrelated to anything that's real. And now for me this is the beginning of trying to see if that rupture can be healed somehow, and trying to go back to a world where we can actually talk to people and not just being seen as the monster by a system that can only construct and deal with monsters. Anyway, I don't know what to say right now, but any questions you have, I'm very, very happy to speak to anyone and answer any question at any point, whenever.
Brilliant, Carlo, brilliant. Now to the warriors in the exercise. Karen.
At Tom's trial, Mr. Justice Cook presided over an unfair trial, and for that he must take responsibility. However, I do not stop there. The Serious Fraud Office and their representatives are under a duty to prosecute fairly, and just because a judge gives them a direction that is totally in their favour but actually wrong in law, my view is that they were and are under a duty to inform the court and to attempt to correct the position. In that, the SFO failed spectacularly, and the result destroyed people's lives who frankly did not deserve it. I'd like to thank Tom's exceptional counsel, Adrian Derbyshire KC and Tom Doble, who have been amazing to work with. I think we've made a great team. But most of all, I'd like to say thank you to Tom and Sarah for trusting me with this case and taking me on this journey with them. I think the most important thing that I've done over the last 9 years is just to be the one that picks them up the soonest from yet another knockback and say, right, we fight on. And that's what we've done, and we finally won. But in some ways, there are no winners here. Tom has missed out on formative years with his son, time with his family, and the loss of his career and his home, time he will never get back. The case highlights numerous problems with our criminal justice system, all of which I believe meet the criteria for a public inquiry. The Supreme Court is critical of the drafting of the indictment by the SFO and their team. Tom was charged on an indictment containing conspiracy to defraud, contrary to common law. This charge has caused many miscarriages of justice because it is hopelessly vague. That the CCRC took so long, over 6 years, to refer the case back to the Court of Appeal, it was just all far too slow. The right of the Court of Appeal to prevent criminal cases going to the Supreme Court unless they certify a point of law should be removed. The prosecution of individuals by organisations other than the CPS, I include in this, as well as the SFO, the Post Office and the RSPCA, should be removed. The only body who should be bringing criminal prosecutions in the United Kingdom are the Crown Prosecution Service. The dual role of the SFO as investigator and prosecutor creates a substantial conflict of interest, which creates miscarriages of justice. Thank you very much. Justice at last.
Ben,
that's quite hard to follow, Karen. Yeah. Very hard to follow. This is a really bittersweet moment. the sweetness for me is in three parts. The first is that Carlo and 10 years and 1 day of that mad ruling by Justice Cook has been corrected. The second is that the ruling today in the Supreme Court is likely to offer a route by which the others who have been convicted and who have served time in prison can right the wrong that has been done to them. And the third is that, albeit very, very late in the day, the system has recognised that it made a significant mistake and it has corrected it. And for that, I think it needs some acknowledgement. But, as I said at the beginning, there is some bitterness, and the bitterness is in two parts. The first is that it took such a long, long time to correct for any criminal lawyer, and anybody who has watched Suits or LA Law, and now I'm dating myself, will recognise that there is a fundamental error in the way this case was prosecuted, and a way in which the Crown Courts and the Court of Appeal have repeatedly endorsed until the Supreme Court finally overruled it, which was there is a distinction in the roles between the judge and the jury. And for some reason, and we can maybe get on to what that reason was, in this case, that distinction was overridden and the judges usurped the role of the jury. And that should not happen in a country that abides by the rule of law. The second is really contained in Lord Justice Legate's opening remark. And he says, and I'll read it to you, and it's all there on the in the judgment now, the history of these two cases raises concerns about the effectiveness of the criminal appeal system in England and Wales in confronting legal error. Now, whilst the Supreme Court righted the wrong for Carlo and Tom, unfortunately, the judgment does not unpack why that happened in this case. And Karen has very eloquently pointed to some of those errors in terms of the failure, the spineless failure of the Court of Criminal Appeal to correct a fundamental error of a Crown Court judge is a significant failing. And the second error is the failure of the Criminal Cases Review Commission to rapidly investigate this and then refer it up to the Court of Appeal. And the third is the systemic wrong that Karen and David have just touched upon of the Court of Appeal acting as a gatekeeper in criminal cases as to what cases can and can't go to the Supreme Court. So that, in a nutshell, is what I would say.
That's not a bad follow-on. Okay, let's go to questions. Ben from Times. Yeah.
Tom and Carlo, what are you going to do next? Because obviously you have to relinquish a lot of money that was deemed the proceeds of crime. How much do both of you have to hand over? What might you do to recoup that? And also, is there any other compensation that you're owed from the government, given your convictions have now been quashed? Thank you very much.
Well, in terms of compensation for the fact we were imprisoned, we won't get anything thanks to Chris Grayling. He changed the law in 2014 in relation to that. When I say we won't get anything, I need to take advice, I should say, but I very much doubt it. Proceeds of crime, reduce some money back. I haven't sat down and worked out. I think they give us like 2% compounded interest, so yeah, might be able to. It might be slightly more than they took from me. But I mean, for me, I don't really want today to be, from my perspective, focused on money or even compensation. Those are all matters to sit down and machinate over in the future. And it's a very broad question. What do I want to do next? I've lived the last 10 years on a 24-hour basis because I've been unable to plan any aspect of my life. So from 2012 onwards, I faced the 200-year indictment in the US. I was being prosecuted in the UK. I didn't know where I was going to be, which continent I was going to be on. I was then facing a criminal trial. I was then in prison. I was then out on licence. So my ability to plan anything has just disappeared. So the only way I could actually live my life was just living 24 hours, going from one day to the next. And now suddenly the vista of freedom and choice and what I might do has been opened up to me. And everyone says, well, what are you going to do? And my answer to that is simply, I don't know. My main goal is to go and live close to the sea. I don't know where, but I'd like to be near a large body of water. And I can't really explain why that is, but that's really what I would love to do.
Right. As Tom says, today's not about money. Just a matter of fact, about 4 weeks ago, I think about then, I raised the whole question of the compensation arrangements with the Prime Minister. And very unusually, he said he'd look at it. So, we may be seeing a change on that front.
That's across the...
Well, as Tom referred to, there have been two changes in the compensation arrangements. One is over the size, and the other is over who qualifies. And the effect of that is 93% of people who are wrongfully convicted and serve prison terms are not allowed to claim compensation. Right? And those that do, I think, are charged rent.
Bed and board, I think they've changed.
Bed and board by Her Majesty's Prison Service, right? So all those things should be looked at. Actually, to be fair to Mr. Keir Starmer, that was an area of interest of his before he came into politics, and he did actually engage in the question when it was asked. Normally speaking, you know what Prime Minister's questions are like. It's sort of it's not about question and answer normally, but on that day he showed serious interest. So we'll see. We'll see on that front. Other questions, sir?
Hi, Tom. John Paul Ford from the Daily Mail. Congratulations on today's ruling. I just wanted to ask you a bit more about how you felt in the precise moment when you learned of the ruling, and whether that elation was mixed with, some other people have talked about bitterness and anger. You haven't said anything about that because you've lost so much, and that's been touched on as well. So I just wanted to, if you do feel anger, and if you do want the judge in particular to have to answer for the quite severe criticisms that were made of him today.
I think those criticisms, personally speaking, those criticisms for me, they say enough in themselves. I've had to deal with a lot of rage and anger and bitterness in prison, and I managed to defeat that in the large part. It's not good for me to be returning to those sorts of emotions. And so, I think Nelson Mandela said, anger is like drinking poison and thinking, drinking poison and think it's going to kill the other person. And for a long time I've tried not to be angry because it's not been good for my mental health. So if I seem sanguine, then I can tell you I battle every day with anger. I battle like a flower bed pulling up weeds all the time to try and stop those emotions, welling up inside me. I think that over the coming weeks and months and possibly even years, there were definitely questions to answer. And I think that people like David and people like Karen and Hickman Rose will push for answers and maybe push for inquiries and so on and so forth. But today's a happy day. And I think Peter Sullivan was in prison for 38 years and he came out, and the only thing that he said to my knowledge was, I'm not bitter and I'm not angry. And if he can say that, then I can say that.
If I can add one comment, when I spoke to Tom after he heard about his result, the one thing he said to me is, how are we going to make sure it helps the other 7?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Next question. Sir.
Hi, Danny Halpin from the Press Association. For Carlo and Tom, I suppose, I was wondering, what is the next step in sort of who, for example, would you say is accountable or should be accountable for the injustices that you faced, and how do you go about holding them to account?
Carlo, you go first.
I wish I knew. That's a short answer. And I think part of what has been so hard all this time is there was obviously major injustice being done, and the way it was done and the consistency which it was done made me believe throughout that none of this was done in good faith, realistically. But the power imbalance and the separation, and you don't know how the system works. You don't know who's doing what. means that from this position, you're completely passive. All these things are being done to you. It makes absolutely no sense. You say, unless these people have a very serious, lack of anything, then this is being done on purpose. But you don't know by whom, you don't know how, you just have no idea. There's a system, you're just completely passive and you just take it. And I don't even know how to, get that, information.
We have a question from Eric Albert at Le Monde, who asks, would Tom and Carlo use the word scapegoats for the financial crash to refer to themselves?
Well, I mean, the word scapegoat's been used about both of us continually. We had nothing to do with the financial crisis, like zero. It's always astounded me that I think the narrative that got pushed in the early times was that people lost their houses because of us. I worked in Tokyo dealing with Japanese clients in Japanese yen, and things were moving around, like interest rates might have moved to the 4th decimal place. You got people like, at the time, Wonga were lending money for 6,000%, and it seemed flabbergasting to me that with that we could ever be associated with the financial crisis, because we literally had nothing to do with it. But we got caught up in a lot of politics surrounding a financial crisis, that's for sure. And there was that big sort of like desire from institutions and politicians who were acting in their own self-interest largely, for people to go to prison. And, we were silent in the main because we were told by our lawyers not to talk to the press, and we allowed that false narrative to propagate and spread.
Is there still a country in the world where the libel scandal is still condemned? I mean, after the US and Britain's rulings, is this the end of the libel scandal?
Well, that's a big question. The lawyers have a view.
So far as I'm aware, until the judgment this morning, this was the only country in the world that maintains the position that which Tom and Carlo were accused of was by definition something that was unlawful and dishonest. So that has now put the UK back in line with the rest of the world.
And third and final question from Eric Albert Le Monde is, can legal consequences follow for Justice Cook?
No, I think is the answer.
No,
Right.
no, I think the answer to that is no.
Sir.
Just to correct from the Standard, one of the ideas that's been floated at the moment is for complex fraud trials, just like the ones that you went through, to be overseen only by a judge. Does anyone on the panel think that is a good idea? Could I have your thoughts on the role that juries currently play in these kind of cases?
I have a view, but anybody else first?
I think the right place to start is from the two people who stood trial with a jury, and then I've certainly got a view on that.
Sorry, you go first, Carlo.
I can only talk about my experience, and obviously I have not gone through this experience in countries which have different style of trials. I've heard people talking about getting rid of the jury in the English trial system as it is, and I think that would cause other problems. But my experience is that this jury trial as it is was completely unfit for purpose, because, essentially, because the jury is the one that's, making the final decision, more or less supposedly, the reality of the trial is that the prosecution is not trying to establish the fact and what happened. The judge is not interested in what happened and trying to, what happened, is this guilty, what is the charge, what is the law. All of these things becomes completely irrelevant. The point is, it's an adversarial game where the aim is to convict, and the aim is to convince the jury to convict. Now, the jury doesn't understand the law. The jury does not listen to a 4-month trial. The jury doesn't care to some extent. The jury's got other things in their mind. It becomes essentially a space where the prosecution and the judge can say whatever they want, can make up whatever they want on the basis that anyway the jury is going to see through any lies, which they can't. And also the whole trial becomes based on playing on the emotions of the jury and on using, words, dishonesty, bankers, greed, think about, my judge at trial kept talking about pensioners will lose their pension, company people will lose their homes. None of these things got anything to do with the case, it's got anything to do with the law, but it's impossible to even engage with the facts, engage with the law, engage with the serious reasoned argument if what the whole thing is about is trying to play on the emotions of the jury so that they convict. And to me, that is the problem. Obviously, I'm not saying let's take away the jury and just leave the SFO to decide who goes to prison, but can justice be, in my utopian dream, something where we actually ascertain the facts and we really interested in justice as opposed to a game where people get rewarded for convicting people and the whole thing is about convincing the jury to press the right button?
Tom?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very, very dangerous idea in my opinion. And the way that they wrote their ruling today sort of was carefully couched in terms of leaving the facts to the jury in a jury trial where a jury is impanelled. I mean, we are going down a very slippery slope if we start getting rid of juries, in my mind. And we have to ask, what is the reason that we are doing that for? And we're doing it because we've got a massive court backlog. We're doing it for financial reasons.
Save money.
If we were doing it because we thought it was the better way to administer justice, then we could have a sensible debate about the best way to administer justice. But we are doing this purely as an exercise to try and reduce court backlogs. And had my case been just heard by my trial judge, for example, as he told me before my trial, you're guilty on the email evidence alone. I say that because you are. It's an open and shut case. You're a gambler gambling on a perverse verdict from the jury. And this trial wouldn't last 2 weeks if I was hearing it. And now, I would have stood no chance in front of Justice Jeremy Cook. And so why would I want to leave my fate in his hands? I mean, in the end, he managed to give jury directions that basically convicted me on the basis of those directions alone. So he did the job anyway via another means. But for me to advocate for judges to be hearing these cases, the jury is the last defensive barrier that every citizen in this country has between them and a wrongful conviction. And are juries perfect? No, they're not. Do they make mistakes? Yes, they do. And it's the best of a whole load of options, none of which are perfect. And I really, really hope. I know Leveson has recently recommended that trials like ours be heard potentially without jurors, and I really hope that Parliament does not go down that route. So, sorry, I'm a bit polemic about that.
Karen?
Yep. I think Tom gave my views very eloquently. We have a right to be tried by our peers, and that's what we should be allowed to have. We're only bringing that suggestion in of giving away with juries because of financial reasons, and that is not a proper basis for doing it.
Ben?
Yeah, I'd just like to add this point, which is I think there is a myth that complex fraud trials are too long, too complicated, and should therefore be taken out of the purview of a jury to decide innocence or guilt. And I've been doing my job as a criminal defence lawyer for a very, very long time, and in my view and in my experience, actually, even in complex fraud trials, the fundamental issues about dishonesty or false representations come down to a few very simple propositions. Well prosecuted, which this case was not, well managed by a trial judge, which this case was not, those issues should always be properly left to a jury rather than judges who become immune and inured to hearing the same story time and time again and see their job, as I think this case was a route to nudging the jury to securing a conviction.
Mm-hmm. There's only one, as far as I'm aware, one piece of research into juries' actual decisions because the law prevents it, and that's the Jubilee Line fraud trial, where because it collapsed, the researchers could interview the juries. And I'll summarise what they found. They asked the jury, did you not understand this very complex fraud case? They said, no, we understood it fine. It was the lawyers in the room who didn't understand the case. So draw your own conclusion. Lady in the middle here.
Hi, my name is Hilary from Bloomberg News, and I wanted to ask all of you if you had a direct comment to the Serious Fraud Office now after the ruling, and what you think they can do to regain trust, and more widely how the banking community is responding to this or will respond to this today, what their thoughts and concerns will be going forward, and how the Serious Fraud Office can attest to those.
Okay. Tom, you?
I wasn't investigated by the Serious Fraud Office. I was investigated by third-party counsel for the banks. They controlled the disclosure process. Warrants weren't issued to go and get those documents. 12 million documents in Switzerland were never given to me. The outsourcing of the investigative process by an institution who, by definition, is quote-unquote one of the suspects in that investigation is wholly inappropriate. The use of expert evidence in my case by the Serious Fraud Office, who knowingly instructed an unqualified expert in my case, something that has yet to really come out in the public domain, is a disgrace. It's a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. And I watched the Serious Fraud Office then Chair David Green, effectively lie by omission by not telling the Justice Select Committee about that when he was asked about that self-same expert. It's really... I think the behaviour of the SFO is shocking. In 2011, they determined this wasn't a criminal matter. In 2012, with a new chair, Sir David Green, as he is now, decided that he was going to prosecute it. And that was in a large part due to some of the political pressure that was put upon him. But my general feeling is that the SFO is a conflicted organisation that's not fit for purpose. It's got a history of criminalising the non-criminal. And be that Tesco, be that G4S, be that Serco, and Adrian's probably worked against them on most of those cases. But there is a history of criminalising the non-criminal. And I hope that today's ruling, and again I haven't read it, but I'm just paraphrasing, I'm hoping that we've slightly tightened the parameters under which the SFO will be allowed to continue to operate in that vein.
Okay. Gentleman behind Ben. I'll come back to you, Ben, at the end with the second question.
Good morning. This is Mr. Filippetti from the Italian newspaper Il Sole. So when I came here in 2019, my first case to cover was Carlo's conviction. It was my first. I went to Southwark Court, and it was my first time in an English court ever. So I've been following, covering all the Carlo's Odyssey, for years. So my question is for you, Carlo. What's your opinion about this country now? Because I guess you came to this country, full of hope, full of, career, ambitions and whatever. So what's your opinion now? And maybe you consider to go back to Italy and start a new life?
Not only for you, Carlo.
I don't know. It's hard to say right now. And obviously today feels, much better than before because I feel like this country did destroy my life, but at least 10 years later, we got justice. My opinion about the English justice system obviously is not very good, as an understatement. But then again, this does not happen to me anywhere else, so it's hard for me to say. I don't know. There's a lot of bitterness. Because I remember coming here as a young man thinking that this was a better place than Italy, more functioning better, and all of those stuff. And also I thought it was a place that was open to all people from all cultures and countries, where you could actually live all together, and it was a place to be happy and have a life. And then I've realized that it only seems to be like that from an outside perspective, one. and also realized that I found myself as an outsider, or feeling like an outsider, that I was just being used by the English judiciary and by the banks and by the system for whatever purposes. I mean, one thing that it never really went away from my mind is the fact that, at least to some extent, all these things that have happened to me also because I was no English. And I mean, even if you just look at the trial, and again, going back to the jury, and I agree with a lot of things about jury trial, but also let's look at the fact that of the people that were accused of this, stuff, most of the English accused were acquitted by the juries. In fact, they started by accusing, first Tom, but then other people, and then the jury started to acquit all these English people, and then from that moment onwards, the SFO started to charge only foreigners. And when we look at the people who actually were acquitted or convicted in our trials by jury, the vast majority of English accused were acquitted, whereas the vast majority of non-English accused were convicted. All of the dark-skinned ones were convicted. And all our trials also happened at the same time as the Brexit problem. So at some point, it was really hard to escape an idea that at our trial, not only we were being told to the jury that we were stealing money from the general public, but this was foreigners, Europeans, coming in England from Europe, stealing money from the English people. Like, to me, like that point, that and also another thing that I found was very, very significant is in our first trial, the jury was very multicultural and diverse. And we almost got acquitted. The second time around, the judge, trying to make sure that we got convicted, chose a jury that was almost exclusively white English. And then the reception was completely different, because all of a sudden you have this bunch of European former bankers being tried by a white English jury. I don't know, again, my impression, my relationship to this country is, I mean, to what extent can I heal it? I don't know.
All right, next question. Sir? I didn't see it.
Hi, Alistair from the FT. Just picking up on Carlo's comments there, can you elaborate on, or any thoughts that you have on the implications for the others who were successfully prosecuted? I think it's 7. Thank you.
Was that addressed to Carlo or anybody? Tom?
I think the lawyers are best placed to speak about, the remaining convictions.
Karen?
I think all of them will be taking advice over the course of the next couple of weeks to see if they can overturn their convictions, and that's got to be the case.
I'd be slightly more strident. My initial impression is that the ruling today opens the door to those 7 securing a route by which they can have their convictions overturned. I can't obviously promise that to them, but I think I can see a path.
Good. Sorry.
Nina from PA, thanks. I just wondered what you've learned about yourselves throughout the process. It's been 10 long years. And just what you've learned about yourselves and maybe some resilience in pursuing it to where we are today.
Tom?
My sister-in-law said to me, "You were like a dog with a bone." In prison, people would say to me, "All you do is talk about your case." And I used to have a test in prison called the angry test. It was the people who were angry were innocent because they were so annoyed about and frustrated with the miscarriage of justice they'd gone through. And this 10 years, 12, 13 years has been a journey for me. It's been a journey where I've had to cope with large amounts of anger and bitterness, and I became a Christian in prison, and that really, really helped me in that respect. And I'm a better person today than I was when I went into prison. And, my faith really helped me overcome a lot of the anger and helped me see myself through that sentence. And I think, I had a lot of stuff. Because what is money? Money is stuff. It enables you to buy more stuff, and then more stuff on top of that. And so when you've got lots of stuff, your goal is to acquire more stuff again. But actually, when all your stuff gets taken away from you, and then your liberty gets taken away from you, and your dignity gets taken away from you, and your family gets taken away from you, and your children get taken away from you, what are you left with? And do you miss the stuff? You don't miss the stuff. When I got out of prison, being able to, when I got to my open prison and being able to walk on grass in barefoot, being able to see the stars in the sky was just such an amazing thing. Going on a train and crossing a road. And then when I got released after 5.5 years into COVID, walking around Regent's Park in the snow and hearing the lions roar, those were just amazing things for me. And it was so powerful. And actually, what I would say is I've really learned what you should value in your life as a result of what's happened to me. And I am not chasing stuff anymore. And that's why I was reluctant to talk about the monetary aspects of our exoneration this week. And did you need resilience? Huge resilience, huge mental fortitude. When Churchill said, it's, you just got to keep going when you're getting through hell. It's he was right in saying that. And I personally think that it's formed the person that I am now. And I'm, for everything that happened, I hope that I'm a better person. So I know that, sorry, it was quite a long answer to your question.
Carlo, anything?
Yeah, I agree. It's like when everything gets taken away from you, then you value things a lot more. The other thing is, I think it's, going through this sort of like crazy, horrible experiences also allows to see the world in a different way, to see the relationship, to get out of your bubble. Obviously, I always kind of existed in a very, in my own, middle-class intellectual kind of social bubble. And then all of a sudden I find myself in a completely different place with completely different people and going to experience that before I was aware because I studied them or because I was, teaching them at school, but not because, all of a sudden the books that you were writing about becomes your life. And you see it, and it's like, and this is real, and it's a completely different level of engagement with power and reality and the structure.
Fascinating.
We have a question from Bianca Castro at the Law Society Gazette, and she's got a question for Karen. She asks, what made her, Karen, take on Tom's case in the first place, and how do you feel now, Karen? And the second part of the question, having worked on Tom's case for so long, what do you take away from it?
So I was instructed by Sarah, Tom's now ex-wife, when Tom was already in custody. And Sarah was recommended to me by Janice, who's Gary McKinnon's mother, who had also represented Gary McKinnon. And that's how they came to me. I can't say it's been a financially beneficial case to work on. But it's been fascinating, and I think what I take away from it is never give up. Just keep fighting and just never give up. And we've been knocked back and knocked back again. Last March was just a real knockback, but you've got to pick yourself up and keep going, and that's what we've done, and we finally got there.
Next question.
Hi,
Right, Ben, I think. Sorry.
Another one for me. John Paul Ford from the Mail.
Yep.
Just going back to the SFO and the failures that have been highlighted. Does anyone think there's a future for it? Should it be abolished in its present form?
My view is it should be disbanded. I don't think it's appropriate that they investigate and prosecute in the same way that they have. And I think they really failed as a team in certainly Tom's case and all the other bankers' cases. I don't think they were prosecuted fairly. And my view is they should be disbanded.
Ben?
I actually take the contrary view to that. I think the SFO has failed miserably in a whole succession of cases, but I don't lay the blame for that failure entirely at their feet. I think they have been devoid of political support. and prosecutors are open to attack when they fail to prosecute and they fail to secure convictions by governments that don't adhere to the rule of law that they are supposed to support. So my criticism is that governments have failed to give them political support, they have failed to give them the financial support, and the SFO itself has failed to properly determine which cases it should investigate, which evidence it should advance, and making cases simple. It has a long and terrible history of making what are ultimately quite straightforward issues more complicated than they need to be and overcharging. So no, I'm not in favour of abolishing them. I think they need fundamental root and branch reform, proper resourcing and proper political support to do a very, very important job.
Okay.
We have a couple of questions from members of the public who are watching online. Paul Carlier asks, given the involvement of what he says the entire hierarchy of the UK, FCA, Bank of England, SFO, Cabinet Office, do you think that there is a case for this to actually have a public inquiry about this?
Yes, I think I said in my statement that I do think there are plenty of grounds to raise a public inquiry as to what's gone on, both in relation to the charges, the trials, and the conduct of many of the banks and the financial authorities. Yes, I do think there's definitely grounds for a public inquiry.
And one more question from a member of the public, if I may. They say, this is not from Nigel Cairns, to whoever wishes to answer. Given that public confidence in the judiciary has been seriously undermined by the experiences of Tom and Carlo, should there now be a formal process of introspection by the judiciary themselves?
Yes.
Tom says yes, in case you didn't hear him. It's not, of course, just Tom and Carlo. It's the post office. It's Malkinson. It's Sullivan. You know, all of these people have been let down. So my view is yes, it does need. Actually, it needs a review, a serious review. And there have been a lot of things said along the way. The Law Commission in 2011 reported on expert evidence, for example. That's never been implemented. The Law Commission's currently looking at the appeal rules. Presumably something quite serious will come out of that. So the answer, for me, the answer is yes. Do you want to add anything, Ben, to that?
No.
No? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, fine. Okay, how are we doing? Okay, we'll come to Ben now. We kept him waiting.
It was just a quick one. I wonder, it's coming back to the point about the 7 other convictions the SFO secured in the UK. Do any of the counsel in the room have any thoughts on the likelihood that those will be now overturned and what the route might be for that? Thank you.
A counsel hiding. Where are they?
Yeah, the council are quite properly not on the high table for their own professional reasons. Anybody want to say, comment on it? I mean, Ben,
I thought I had done already.
Yeah, you had. Yeah.
Just, I mean, can I just say quickly in relation to the other 7? I spoke to one of them after the verdict, and he said, "Make sure you talk about us. You know, don't just make it about you and Carlo." And it's really, as David said, once I'd heard the decision and I spoke to him subsequent to hearing the decision, the first thing I said to him is, there are 7 other people. And it's been a real concern for me that each and every single one of those convictions go. We all had the same directions to various degrees of egregiousness. And basically all those convictions need to go, including those people who pled guilty on the back of the fact they didn't feel that they could have a fair trial in this country. Pled guilty on the back of the fact that they were being investigated in 2 jurisdictions, including in America and the Department of Justice. Pled guilty on the back of the fact that they were forced to make a business decision about being financially ruined for the rest of their life, stage of their life where they couldn't afford to take that decision. I mean, a guilty plea doesn't make you guilty. And it doesn't make you guilty in a case where the rest of the world says it's not a criminal act. And this country has criminalised it and constructed a set of directions for a jury where a jury can only do but one thing, which is to find you guilty. So those 7 need justice. And I hope that the SFO have the dignity and decency not to oppose the appeals of those 7 when they come in front of the CACD. Because anything else, frankly, just disgusts me. I'm sorry if that was sort of slightly not answering your question.
No, I think it did answer it very well. Any other comments on it? No? Okay. I think that's it. Yeah. I think today will be seen, as we go into the future as an incredibly important day, not just for Ben and for Tom and Carlo, for whom obviously it's dramatically important, but also for all of those others you've heard about, but also for the system. I think the judicial system needs a shake-up, and this is the latest demonstrator of it, and we will be returning to it in the future. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.